When my daughter walked down the aisle, I carried a secret so heavy it nearly burned in my chest. A secret worth $95 million a fortune I had hidden, not out of greed, but because I wanted to see a simple truth: who would treat me with respect when they thought I had nothing. My name is Richard Coleman, 64 years old, and today I want to share with you a story that changed everything I thought I knew about family respect and the way money poisons hearts. I have lived long enough to understand that wealth has a strange power. Sometimes it makes people kinder, but more often it exposes a darkness in them you never saw coming. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the lesson I learned after losing the love of my life. Her name was Elaine. For 39 years, she was my anchor, my compass, the reason I believed in love at first sight. We were never rich. I worked my entire career as a hospital facilities supervisor, while she spent her life teaching elementary school children how to read and dream big. We raised our daughter Naomi in a modest 3-bedroom house in southeast Baltimore. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, filled with laughter, Sunday dinners, and a love no amount of money could buy. Then Elaine was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Malignant, merciless. We had 3 months to hold each other, whisper words unsaid for years, and prepare for a world I could not imagine surviving without her. And just before she left me, Elaine revealed something that turned my entire world upside down. But before I reveal that secret, I'd like you to do me a small favor. If you haven't subscribed, hit that button now and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. It means more to me than you might realize, because what happened next will leave you utterly stunned. Elaine and I never lived a life of luxury, but we lived a meaningful one. We met at a Howard University graduation dance in 1985. I still remember how the whole room seemed to vanish when she smiled at me. For nearly 4 decades, she was the heartbeat of our family. We settled in southeast Baltimore. Our little brick house had 3 bedrooms, a small garden where Elaine grew tomatoes, and a porch where I drank coffee before work. I wasn't a CEO or politician. I was a hospital facilities supervisor, the guy who made sure the lights never went out and the machines never broke down. Elaine, with her warmth and patience, taught 3rd graders at the local school. We weren't rich, but we were enough. Enough to raise Naomi with discipline, dignity, and dreams. For years, I worked overtime to pay bills and buy Naomi's school books, while Elaine tucked encouragement notes into my lunch bag, reminding me that what I did mattered. We never measured success by paychecks, but by the love filling our home. Then came the diagnosis. I'll never forget the sterile smell of the hospital room, the way the doctor's lips moved, but my ears refused to take in the words, pancreatic cancer. 3 months. 3 months to watch the strongest woman I had ever known fade before my eyes. In those final weeks, we cried, we prayed, we held each other through endless nights. Elaine whispered promises, memories, and just once, something else. A mystery. She told me about a safe deposit box at First National Bank, hidden behind the velvet lining of her jewelry case. I thought it was paperwork, a birth certificate, maybe a few savings bonds from her grandmother. I had no idea what Elaine left behind would not only change my future, but alter the way I saw everyone around me. 2 weeks after Elaine's funeral, the house was too quiet. Every photo frame, every chair she once sat in reminded me of her absence. I needed something to keep my hands busy, so I followed her last instructions, the safe deposit box at First National Bank. The young teller recognized Elaine the moment I said her name. With a sympathetic smile, she whispered, "Mrs. Coleman was such a kind woman. I'm so sorry for your loss." I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and followed her to the back room. Box 247. A small cold steel rectangle. My hands shook as I turned the key, expecting birth certificates, insurance forms, maybe a bundle of old savings bonds worth a few $1,000s. Instead, what landed in my lap was a thick envelope so heavy I collapsed onto the stiff wooden chair they had provided. Slowly, I tore it open. What I found nearly stopped my heart. Trust documents, property deeds, investment portfolios, all under Elaine's maiden name, Elaine Margaret Carter. Accounts, estates, holdings I had never once heard her mention in nearly 40 years of marriage. On top of the stack was a summary sheet written neatly in her teacher's handwriting. My eyes scanned the figures again and again, unwilling to believe. 94,872,560,83. $95 million. I read it over and over until the security guard came close, worried I might faint. My Elaine, my wife, a school teacher, had been a millionaire for nearly 3 decades, and I never knew. She had watched me work double shifts, count every dollar for Naomi's tuition, patch the roof myself instead of hiring help, while quietly earning enough to buy half the neighborhood. And in that moment, grief mixed with disbelief. At last I understood she knew me better than I knew myself. She knew my pride, my stubbornness. She knew if I had learned about this fortune earlier, I might have lost the very thing she loved most about me, my drive to provide for our family with my own hands. That night, staring at the papers spread across the table, one thought struck me. Should I tell Naomi? Or keep the secret? That night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by documents worth more than I could comprehend. The numbers blurred as tears spilled down my cheeks. Elaine had entrusted me with this secret, and now I had to decide what to do with it. Naomi, our daughter, had just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins. She was on her way to becoming a respected pediatric surgeon. She was finally standing on her own, making her own way in the world. The last thing I wanted was to burden her with $95 million she wasn't ready for. I remembered the look in Elaine's eyes when she saw me working myself to exhaustion. She would gently say, "Richard, you're too proud." And she was right. My whole life I had believed my worth came from working with my hands, fixing what was broken, putting food on the table, paying bills on time. That's how I defined being a man. To provide. To protect. Elaine hid the money because she understood me. She knew if I had discovered it earlier, I would never have allowed myself to work overtime again. She knew I needed to believe I was carrying the family, not the other way around. So I decided to keep the fortune a secret for now. Naomi was just beginning her career, her independence. I wanted to see who she would become without the weight of it. But there was something else, something I couldn't ignore. Lately, Naomi's voice on our weekly calls had sounded different, excited, anxious, as if she were holding back a piece of news too big to contain. 3 months later, she walked into my living room with a radiance I hadn't seen since she was a child. "Dad," she said, her eyes shining, "I want you to meet someone special. His name is Alexander Prescott. And I'm going to marry him." In that instant, I knew the real test of this secret was only just beginning. Naomi had always been respectful, disciplined, the kind of daughter who called every Sunday just to check in. But that evening, sitting on the living room sofa, she seemed entirely different, almost glowing. "His name is Alexander Prescott," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Dad, I think he's the one. And I'm going to marry him." The name Prescott didn't ring any bells for me, but the way Naomi spoke like she had just won the lottery caught my attention. Her eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen since the day she opened her medical school acceptance letter. "He's amazing, Dad. Smart, generous, ambitious. He's finishing his MBA at Georgetown, and his family, Well, they're very successful. His father runs Prescott and Company Investments. I still didn't recognize the name, but I could hear the reverence in her voice. And you love him? I asked softly. Naomi smiled almost shyly. I love him more than anything. I studied her face. She was serious. I'd like to bring him over next weekend if that's okay, she continued, twisting her hands nervously. Or maybe we could have dinner here, like old times. Of course I agreed. If this man had captured my daughter's heart, I wanted to look him in the eye. Still, something in Naomi's nervousness unsettled me. She was worried too. Worried. The following weekend, Alexander Prescott came to my house. He was everything Naomi had promised, tall, handsome, polished, walking with the confidence of someone raised to believe the world belonged to him. His handshake was firm, his smile warm, and his compliments perfectly rehearsed. During dinner, he praised Elaine's old china set and politely asked about my years at the hospital. But his eyes wandered, lingering on the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the humble family photos on the wall. Charming, yes. Respectful, yes. But beneath the shine, I sensed something else. Something sharp. Something that told me Alexander Prescott didn't see me as Naomi's father, but as an obstacle to be managed. And that was when I realized this story was no longer just about money. It was about respect. A few weeks later, Naomi begged me to join her for dinner at the Prescott estate in Potomac, Maryland. Driving up the winding driveway past manicured hedges and a fountain taller than my house, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like a man walking into a museum of wealth. Jonathan Prescott III. Alexander's father greeted me at the door. His handshake was crushing, the kind meant to test strength rather than offer welcome. Richard, isn't it? Naomi tells us you work at a hospital. Must be steady, always having power to keep the lights on. His tone was polite, but every word dripped with condescension. I smiled evenly. It has its rewards. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and old money. Margaret Prescott. Alexander's mother appeared in pearls and a gown that likely cost more than my monthly salary. She spoke with the polished charm of a woman used to commanding rooms. We're so excited about the wedding, she said, as uniformed staff poured cocktails. Alexander has such diverse tastes. It's one of his most admirable qualities. Diverse tastes. As though Naomi were some exotic accessory chosen to add variety to their flawless collection of wealth. Throughout dinner, I watched my proud, brave daughter change before my eyes. She laughed too quickly at Alexander's jokes, downplayed her medical accomplishments, even offered to contribute more toward the wedding than I knew she could afford. Oh, don't be silly, dear, Margaret laughed, patting Naomi's hand as if she were a child. Jonathan and I will happily cover everything. We understand. The financial differences between our families. Financial differences. The words cut deep. It wasn't about helping, it was about reminding Naomi of her supposed place. And the worst part, she let them. My daughter, the woman Elaine and I had raised to stand tall, was shrinking beneath their gaze. Driving home that night to my quiet house, I didn't just feel out of place. For the first time in years, I felt ashamed not of myself, but that Naomi was becoming part of their world. As the wedding plans accelerated, the subtle slights grew sharper. At a cake tasting in Georgetown, Margaret Prescott leaned across the marble counter and sweetly remarked, "Of course we're keeping costs reasonable. Not everyone can afford the premium tier." She smiled, but her eyes flicked toward me. The knife had landed. When we toured the venue, a private country club with crystal chandeliers and membership fees higher than my annual salary, Jonathan Prescott made his point clear. Membership here is selective. But don't worry. Richard, you'll be our guest. His words carried the weight of ownership as though I were borrowing air from his world. I stayed silent, reminding myself my daughter's happiness mattered more than my pride. But the final blow came at the rehearsal dinner. We were seated in the Prescott's grand dining hall, surrounded by imported Dutch flowers, when Margaret unfurled a meticulously drawn seating chart. Her pen tapped the page. "Richard," she began without looking up. "We've placed you at table 12 near the back. You'll be seated with some, let's call them our more intimate guests. We just thought you'd be more comfortable there. Table 12. Near the kitchen doors. With the afterthoughts." Naomi kept her eyes glued to her phone, pretending not to hear. Alexander busied himself arranging flowers, deliberately distracted. "And me," I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "All right," I said quietly. Margaret beamed. "Wonderful. You're so understanding, Richard. Not everyone is so gracious with logistics." Jonathan chimed in smoothly. "We appreciate your flexibility. Large events can be overwhelming for those unfamiliar." I smiled politely, but inside something cracked. Not because of their arrogance, I had endured worse in life, but because my daughter, the girl who once boasted her father could fix anything in the hospital, sat silent while they treated me like a burden to be managed. That night I realized this wasn't just their wedding. This was a test of dignity. And so far, Naomi was failing. The Prescott wedding was everything Margaret had promised, lavish, excessive, and wasteful in its grandeur. The country club ballroom was transformed into a palace. Thousands of white roses lined the aisle. Chandeliers sparkled like frozen fireworks, and candles flickered on tables set with silver and crystal. It was spectacular and suffocating. I wore my best suit, the same one I had worn to Elaine's funeral. As the music swelled and the guests arrived, senators, judges, CEOs, I quietly took my seat at table 12. My companions. 2 distant Prescott relatives who looked puzzled to be there, a distracted college friend of Alexander glued to his phone all night, and a scattering of miscellaneous guests clearly managed rather than welcomed. From the shadows of the back, I watched Naomi walk down the aisle. She was radiant in a gown I later learned cost more than my car. Alexander stood tall in his tuxedo, exuding aristocratic pride. They exchanged vows beneath an altar worth more than my yearly salary, while the room applauded politely. I thought of Elaine. She would have cried tears of joy, but she would also have felt the sting of how we were treated like afterthoughts at our own daughter's celebration. During the reception, Jonathan raised his glass to welcome Naomi into our family as though they were doing her a great favor. The maid of honor gushed about how lucky Naomi was to find someone so genuine, as if she had stumbled upon a rare artifact at a flea market. Everything was beautiful. Everything was perfect. Yet from table 12, I felt like a stranger at my daughter's wedding. Naomi barely glanced my way, too busy laughing with Alexander's business associates, shaking hands with men who hadn't even known she existed 6 months earlier. And then Margaret stood from the head table, crystal glass in hand, ready to give a toast. I didn't know then that her words would ignite the fire inside me. Part 9. When I couldn't stay silent any longer. The ballroom fell silent as Margaret Prescott rose from the head table, crystal glass catching the golden light of the chandeliers. She exuded the confidence of a woman who had never once doubted her place in the world. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice smooth and commanding. "Jonathan and I are so delighted to welcome you all to celebrate the marriage of our son Alexander to his beautiful bride Naomi." Polite applause rippled through the room. I noticed the way she said Naomi's name like she was still rehearsing it. When Alexander first told us about Naomi, Margaret continued, we were struck by her dedication to medicine, her authenticity. It's refreshing to meet someone so genuine, untouched by the pressures of modern life. Authentic. Genuine. The words didn't sound like praise. They sounded like she was describing a quaint antique she'd stumbled across. Her smile never wavered as she went on. Of course, when two families come together, adjustments must be made. We've learned so much about different backgrounds and lifestyles, and we are confident Naomi will adapt beautifully to our traditions. We only hope her family, her eyes locked on table 12, will also adjust to this new way of life. Change can be difficult, but with patience and tolerance, we can all rise together. Her words landed like a punch to my gut. Her family. Adjust. Rise together. As if Elaine and I hadn't raised Naomi with values stronger than any bank account. As if my presence here was a burden to be managed, not a father to be honored. I glanced at Naomi, praying to see fire in her eyes, some spark of defiance. Instead, she simply nodded, complicit in Margaret's smile. Applause filled the room, guests praising the Prescotts' wisdom and generosity, and that was when something inside me snapped. Not anger, something colder, stronger. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. I pushed my chair back and stood. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom, "but I think there's something that needs to be said." The ballroom froze, not the polite hush of anticipation, but the sharp, uneasy silence of 300 people realizing something unexpected was about to unfold. Margaret's smile stiffened, her glass frozen midair. Jonathan shifted in his seat, ready to intervene. Naomi's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. I adjusted my tie, the same one I'd worn at Elaine's funeral, and stepped into the center of the marble floor. Each footstep echoed like a drumbeat. "First of all," I began evenly, "thank you all for being here tonight. It means a great deal to see so many gathered to celebrate Naomi and Alexander's love." I paused, sweeping my gaze across senators, judges, CEOs, all staring at me, no doubt wondering what a hospital facilities supervisor could possibly have to say. Margaret spoke about adjusting to new lifestyles. I continued, polite but firm, and she's right. This marriage does bring together two very different worlds. Margaret's lips curved, certain I was about to thank her for her magnanimity. Instead, I reached into my jacket and unfolded a piece of paper. "You see, I've been keeping a secret. 6 months ago, when my wife Elaine passed away, she left me something she'd hidden for nearly 30 years, afraid it might change who I was." Slowly, deliberately, I held up the bank statement. "This is just one account. The balance, $95 million. The room gasped. Margaret's face drained of color. Jonathan stared at the paper as though it might burst into flames. Alexander froze in disbelief. "I could pay for this wedding 100 times over," I said, my voice rising. "I could buy this country club outright, but I wanted to see who would treat me with respect when they believed I had nothing." The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that comes right before thunder splits the sky. I folded the paper and slipped it back into my pocket, letting the silence weigh heavy across the room. 300 of Washington's elite sat frozen, unsure whether to clap, cough, or avert their eyes. "Margaret," I said, turning to her, "you hoped my family would adapt to this lifestyle. Don't worry, we've lived quite comfortably already. We just measure wealth differently than you." Gasps rippled through the tables. At last, Jonathan spoke, his voice stumbling. "Richard, we had no idea." "No," I replied evenly. "You didn't. And that's the problem. Because you thought I was beneath you, You treated me like a burden, someone to be tucked away at table 12, someone to be tolerated for Naomi's sake. But here's what you didn't know. I spent my life fixing what was broken so doctors could save lives. I raised a daughter who heals children every day, and I married a woman who taught hundreds of kids to read and believe in themselves. That, Jonathan, that is wealth. That is legacy. I turned to Naomi. Her eyes brimmed with tears, her makeup streaked under the ballroom lights. Naomi, I love you more than life itself, but tonight I watched you sit silent as your new family treated me like I wasn't human. That is not the way your mother and I raised you. We raised you to stand tall, to know your worth. Naomi sobbed openly now. Alexander stared at the floor, the polished mask on his face cracking. Margaret's smile had vanished, replaced with pale, shaking silence. I straightened my shoulders. So here's what will happen. I will leave. I will return to the home where your mother and I built our life, where we raised you with dignity and love. And maybe one day, Naomi, you'll remember who you are. Until then, I will not sit at the back, not at your wedding, not in your life. With that, I turned and walked toward the doors. My footsteps echoed against the marble. For the first time that night, I didn't feel out of place. I felt free. I was halfway across the parking lot when hurried footsteps chased me. Dad, wait. Please. Naomi's voice broke in the cool night air. I stopped, my back still to her. I wasn't ready to face her, not after everything. Dad. I'm sorry, she sobbed, clutching my arm. I don't know what happened to me. I let them make me ashamed of the man who raised me. I let them treat you like nothing, and I didn't stop it. Slowly, I turned. Tears streaked her face, her perfect wedding gown trailing across the asphalt. Alexander stood at the doorway, pale and silent. He didn't follow her. You forgot who you were, I said softly, heavy with disappointment. You let their world convince you what they had was better than what we built. That's not the Naomi your mother raised. Naomi shook her head, shattered. What do I do? Dad, how do I fix this? I reached into my jacket one last time, not for the bank statement, but for a neatly folded letter in Elaine's handwriting. Your mother didn't just leave money, I told her. She left a plan. She wanted us to start a foundation, full scholarships for children from working families who dream of becoming doctors, teachers, engineers. Kids with brains and hearts but no bank accounts. She called it the Elaine and Richard Coleman Fund. Naomi gasped, tears flowing anew. She wanted you to help manage it one day when you were ready, when you finally understood the difference between having money and being defined by money. Her sobs quieted, replaced by a determined nod. I pulled her into my arms, holding her as I had when she was a child after a nightmare. I love you, Naomi. Nothing will change that. But respect. Respect has to be earned even in a family. Standing there under the cold lights of the country club, I knew the Prescotts could keep their chandeliers and champagne. Our true fortune awaited in Elaine's vision in the lives we were about to change. And for the first time in months, I felt clarity. Clarity about who we were. Clarity about what truly mattered.